Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundations of Sand. Doug Brenner stood at the corner window of his office overlooking the Seattle skyline, a view he had earned through 20 years of relentless work. At 42, he had built Brenner Construction from nothing, transforming it from a small renovation company into one of the Pacific Northwest's premier commercial builders. His weathered hands, still calloused despite years behind a desk, traced the outline of a new blueprint, a community center he was personally designing for his old neighborhood. "You're still here." Hank Robeson, Doug's project manager and friend since high school, leaned against the doorframe. His salt and pepper beard couldn't hide his concerned expression. "It's past 8, and it's your anniversary. Vanessa's gonna have your hide." Doug checked his watch and cursed under his breath. Lost track of time. 15 years today. He rolled up the blueprints with practiced precision. "I've got reservations at Altura." "Fancy. You keeping the tradition alive? What gem is year 15 again?" "Crystal," Doug said, slipping into his jacket. "Got her something special this time." He patted his pocket where a small velvet box held a pair of crystal and diamond earrings that had cost more than his first car. The truth was, Doug had been throwing himself into work more lately. Things with Vanessa had grown distant. When they'd met 12 years ago, she'd been captivated by his ambition and raw determination, a quality missing in the trust fund circle she frequented. For Doug, Vanessa Sullivan had been untouchable royalty, the daughter of Roland Sullivan, whose real estate empire was practically Seattle legend. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Doug had grown up in South Seattle, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. Every opportunity he'd ever had, he'd created through sheer force of will. College came through scholarships and night classes while working construction during the day. When he finally landed his first major contract at 27, he'd celebrated by buying his mother a house, a moment that still ranked as his proudest achievement. Vanessa, by contrast, had never wanted for anything. Private schools, European vacations, and a condo purchased by Daddy when she decided to try her hand at interior design, a career she abandoned after 2 years when it required too much hustle. "You talked to her old man lately?" Hank asked, walking Doug to the elevator. Doug's jaw tightened. "Roland? No, haven't seen him since Christmas." The tension between Doug and his father-in-law had been palpable from day one. Roland had never quite believed Doug was good enough for his daughter, despite Doug's success. The old man had offered to set him up multiple times, as though Doug's business was some hobby to be improved upon by Sullivan money and connections. "I just don't trust the guy," Hank continued. "Remember when he tried to poach Mendoza from us for that waterfront project?" "Ancient history," Doug replied, though the memory still stung. "Vanessa barely talks to him these days anyway. Some falling out over her brother Carson's trust fund getting dissolved." The elevator doors opened, and Doug stepped in, eager to end the conversation. "I'll see you tomorrow. We got the Westlake bid to finalize." As he drove his modest Audi, he'd never seen the point in flashier cars. To their lakeside home, Doug reflected on his marriage. The passion that had once burned white-hot had cooled considerably. Vanessa's shopping sprees had increased, as had her girls' trips to Palm Springs, New York, and most recently, Monaco. Doug had been invited to none of them, always too busy with work, according to Vanessa. He pulled into the driveway of their contemporary home, a clean-lined structure of glass and cedar that he'd designed himself as a wedding present to Vanessa. The lights were on, and he could see her silhouette moving in the kitchen. Taking a deep breath, Doug grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat and headed inside, trying to recapture the optimism he'd felt on their wedding day. Maybe tonight would rekindle something. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. He had no idea that in less than 4 months, his entire life would be upended by a single Facebook notification. Chapter 2, The Desperate Plea. 3 months later, Doug was reviewing contractor bids in his home office when Vanessa burst in, her eyes red and swollen. This was unusual. Vanessa prided herself on always looking immaculate. Her dirty blonde hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Ness, what's wrong? Doug stood immediately, concern overriding the irritation he'd felt at the interruption. It's Dad, she sobbed, collapsing into the leather chair across from his desk. He's sick, Doug. Really sick. Doug walked around the desk and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. Despite their recent distance, seeing her in pain still affected him deeply. What happened? What did the doctors say? Between hiccuping sobs, Vanessa explained that Roland had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition, one that required specialized surgery. The procedure isn't covered by insurance. It's experimental, but it's his only chance. She looked up at Doug, her blue eyes pleading. He needs help. Of course, Doug said automatically. Whatever he needs. I can call some specialists I know from the hospital project. Get a second opinion at least. Vanessa shook her head. He's already seen the best. There's only one doctor who can do this surgery, Dr. Reinhardt in Switzerland. Dad's too proud to ask for help, but I can't just let him die. Doug felt a twinge of suspicion. Roland Sullivan was worth millions. Why would he need financial help for medical treatment? I thought your father had extensive health coverage and liquid assets. The market crash hit him harder than anyone knew, Vanessa explained, her voice steadying. Most of his money is tied up in properties that aren't selling, and he's too proud to liquidate at a loss. She squeezed Doug's hand. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. How much does he need? Doug asked, already calculating what they could spare. Vanessa hesitated. $300,000. Doug's breath caught. It was a staggering amount. Most of his personal savings were tied up in the business or their home. The only place he had that kind of liquidity was his retirement account. That's almost everything in my 401k, he said slowly. We take a huge penalty for early withdrawal. I know, Vanessa whispered, fresh tears flowing. I've already offered to sell my jewelry, my car, everything, but it's not enough and time is running out. She buried her face in her hands. I can't lose him, Doug. For all his faults, he's still my father. Doug's relationship with his father-in-law flashed through his mind. Roland had always been condescending, had never respected Doug's achievements. Just last Christmas, he made a snide comment about Doug's business being quaint compared to Sullivan Enterprises. But this wasn't about Roland. It was about Vanessa. Despite their problems, he still loved her, and he couldn't bear to see her suffer if there was something he could do to prevent it. Let me think about it, he said finally. There might be a way to make this work. Later that night, after Vanessa had fallen asleep, Doug sat at his desk looking over his financial portfolio. Liquidating his retirement would mean starting over at 42. Years of careful saving gone. But what choice did he have? This was family. He thought about his own mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier after a brief battle with cancer. He would have done anything to save her. How could he deny Vanessa the same chance? The next morning, Doug contacted his financial advisor to initiate the withdrawal. When he told Vanessa, she threw her arms around him and wept with gratitude. You've saved his life, she whispered. I'll never forget this, Doug. Never. In the days that followed, Vanessa was transformed. The distance between them seemed to vanish as she doted on him, cooked his favorite meals, and was more affectionate than she had been in years. Doug found himself hoping that perhaps this crisis, terrible as it was, might be the thing that saved their marriage. When the money was finally transferred to the specialist clinic in Switzerland, Vanessa insisted on delivering it personally. Dad's too weak to travel, she explained. I need to handle the paperwork and get him set up for the procedure. It might take a few weeks. Doug offered to go with her, but a major project was at a critical juncture. You stay and take care of business, Vanessa insisted. I'll call every day with updates. At the airport, she kissed him with unusual passion. You're the most generous man I've ever known, she said, caressing his face. I don't deserve you. As he watched her walk through the security checkpoint, Doug felt a strange flicker of unease. But he pushed it aside. This was Vanessa, his wife, his partner. If he couldn't trust her, whom could he trust? Chapter 3, Digital Betrayal. 2 months after Vanessa's departure for Switzerland, Doug was working late again. Her calls had become less frequent, The updates on Roland's condition increasingly vague. Post-operative complications had been mentioned, necessitating an extended stay in Europe. Doug had suggested flying out for a weekend, but Vanessa had discouraged it. The clinic had strict visitor policies, she claimed, and her father was still extremely fragile. "Just wanted to check if you heard anything more from Vanessa," Hank said, appearing in Doug's doorway. "Liz was hoping to have you both over for dinner when she gets back." Doug rubbed his tired eyes. "Still in Switzerland. Roland's recovery is taking longer than expected." Hank frowned. "Weird that you haven't seen any hospital photos or anything. Vanessa usually documents everything on social media." She said the clinic has privacy policies. No photos allowed. Even as he said it, Doug realized how hollow the explanation sounded. Hank seemed unconvinced, but didn't press further. "Well, the offer stands. Let us know when she's back." After Hank left, Doug found himself staring at his computer screen, the construction schedules blurring before his eyes. On impulse, he opened Facebook, a platform he rarely used. Vanessa, on the other hand, was a prolific poster, constantly updating her status and sharing photos of her glamorous life. Except, strangely, during this Switzerland trip, her usual stream of posts had dried up completely. Doug scrolled through his feed absently, until a familiar face caught his eye. It was Moira Davidson, Vanessa's closest friend since college. She had posted an album titled Monaco Madness. Bottle with popping cork, clinking glasses, bikini sun, just 3 hours earlier. His finger hesitated over the image. Moira and Vanessa were inseparable. It seemed odd that Moira would be vacationing in Monaco, while Vanessa was dealing with a family medical crisis in Switzerland. Curiosity overcoming him, Doug clicked on the album. The first few photos showed Moira posing on a yacht, champagne in hand. Nothing unusual. Then, like a punch to the gut, Doug saw it. Vanessa, his wife, lounging on the deck of the same yacht, wearing an expensive-looking bikini and oversized sunglasses, laughing with a glass of champagne in her hand. His hands trembling, Doug clicked through more photos. Each new image was another knife twist. Vanessa dancing at what appeared to be a Monte Carlo casino. Vanessa shopping on designer boutique line streets. Vanessa at a beachside restaurant, leaning intimately close to a tanned, dark-haired man Doug had never seen before. In one particularly damning photo, Vanessa was kissing this stranger, her wedding ring clearly visible as her hand rested on his chest. Doug felt physically ill. The room seemed to spin around him as the truth crashed down with crushing weight. There was no surgery. There was no sick father. It had all been an elaborate lie to steal his money, money that was now funding Vanessa's European romance. With growing horror, Doug realized the extent of the betrayal. He'd liquidated his retirement fund, paid massive penalties for early withdrawal, all to finance his wife's affair. In a daze, he picked up his phone and dialed Roland Sullivan's office number. His heart pounded as he waited through 3 rings. "Sullivan Enterprises, this is Patricia," came the crisp response. "Hi, Patricia. It's Douglas Brenner. Is Roland available?" "Oh, hello, Mr. Brenner. Mr. Sullivan is in a meeting, but I can have him call you back. He's leaving for his squash game at 4, so it might be tomorrow." Doug's grip tightened on the phone. "Squash game? So he's feeling well these days?" Patricia laughed lightly. "Oh yes, he never misses his Thursday match with Judge Winters. Can I tell him what this is regarding?" "No," Doug managed, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "No message. Thank you." He hung up and sat motionless, the truth settling over him like a shroud. Roland wasn't sick. Roland wasn't in Switzerland. Roland was playing squash with a judge in Seattle while his daughter spent Doug's retirement money on a Mediterranean vacation with her lover. With clinical detachment, Doug returned to the Facebook photos. He needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. He studied the man in the pictures, tall, athletically built, with the casual confidence of old money. In one photo, Moira had helpfully tagged him, Jackson Montgomery. A quick search revealed that Jackson Montgomery was a financial consultant and venture capital advisor with an office in Bellevue. His Instagram showed a life of luxury, private jets, sports cars, exclusive clubs, the trappings of wealth without any clear source to fund it. Doug downloaded every photo saved every scrap of information he could find. Then he called Abigail, his younger sister and the only family he had left. "Abby," he said when she answered, his voice unnaturally calm. "I need a good divorce attorney. The best you can find." "Doug." Alarm filled his sister's voice. "What happened?" "Vanessa's been lying to me. About everything." He couldn't bring himself to elaborate further. "Can you help me or not?" "Of course I can," Abby replied without hesitation. "I'll call Tori Klein. She handled Blake Preston's divorce last year. He got full custody and kept the hunting lodge. She's a shark." "Good," Doug said. "I need a shark." After hanging up, Doug sat in silence for a long time. The pain was almost unbearable, but beneath it, something else was crystallizing, a cold, implacable resolve. Vanessa, he thought she had one. She thought she could steal his money, betray his trust, and laugh about it on a yacht with her lover. She had no idea what was coming. Doug opened his laptop and began making notes. He would not act rashly. He would not show his hand. He would plan, gather evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. According to her most recent text, Vanessa was planning to return in 3 weeks, just in time for their anniversary dinner, which she had insistently reminded him to book at Le Bernardin, their favorite restaurant. How considerate of her to provide such a perfect stage for a confrontation. Doug smiled grimly as he typed a response. "Can't wait to see you, sweetheart. I missed you so much. Already made the reservations. It'll be a night to remember." It certainly would be, though not in the way Vanessa imagined. Chapter 4. Anniversary Confrontation. Doug spent the next 3 weeks in meticulous preparation. While maintaining a facade of normalcy in his text to Vanessa, he was setting the stage for what would come next. His first meeting with Tori Klein had been illuminating. The attorney, a formidable woman in her late 40s with a reputation for leaving opposing counsel in tears, had listened to his story without interruption, her expression betraying nothing. "You have grounds for an airtight divorce case," she'd said when he finished. "With the right evidence, we can pursue charges of fraud as well." But she'd leaned forward, fixing him with a penetrating stare. "If revenge is what you're after, the legal system has its limitations. Are you sure you don't want to simply serve her papers at the airport and be done with it?" Doug had shaken his head. "I want her to know exactly what she's done. I want to see her face when she realizes it's over." Tori had nodded slowly. "Then we'll need more than just the Facebook photos. We need bank records, travel documentation, anything that proves where the money actually went." That had led to Doug's second key alliance with Wesley Collins, a former Seattle PD detective turned private investigator. Wes was a gruff, no-nonsense professional who specialized in infidelity cases and financial fraud. His methods occasionally skirted the edges of legality, but his results were undeniable. "This Montgomery character," Wes had said during their second meeting, sliding a folder across the desk. "He's got a history. 3 marriages, all to wealthy women, all ended within 2 years. No charges were ever filed, but there's a pattern of these women losing substantial assets during the relationships." Doug had studied the file. "So he's a professional con man. More sophisticated than that," Wes had corrected. "He targets women with access to family money, builds relationships over time. The Marks never press charges because they're too embarrassed. Usually, the families quietly settle to avoid publicity. And Vanessa? They've known each other longer than you might think." Wes had produced surveillance photos showing Vanessa and Jackson at various locations around Seattle, dating back nearly a year. The money transfers began 6 months ago, small amounts at first, then larger sums leading up to the big one. The revelation that Vanessa's betrayal had been ongoing for so long had sparked a cold fury in Doug's chest. Every anniversary gift, every intimate moment they'd shared in the past year, all while she was planning this elaborate theft with her lover. Now, on the evening of their anniversary, Doug stood in their bedroom adjusting his tie with steady hands. He'd selected his best suit, a charcoal Tom Ford that Vanessa had insisted he buy for client meetings. Image matters, Doug. You need to look the part of success. On the bed lay a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a custom-made photo album containing every damning picture he'd collected, along with bank statements, travel records, and a detailed timeline of her deception. It was bound in expensive leather with "Happy Anniversary" embossed on the cover in gold leaf. His phone buzzed with a text from Luis, his oldest friend who'd flown in from Chicago specifically to support Doug through this ordeal. In position. She's with him now. Doug had asked Luis to conduct surveillance on Vanessa after she landed. As expected, she hadn't come home immediately, but had instead gone straight to Jackson's downtown condo. "Thanks," Doug texted back. "See you at 11. After the confrontation, he planned to meet Luis at a hotel where he'd already booked a room. He had no intention of spending another night in this house with her. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. Doug took a deep breath, tucked the anniversary gift under his arm, and went to greet his wife. Vanessa stood on the doorstep looking radiant. Her skin glowed with a Mediterranean tan, and she'd had her hair styled in elegant waves. She wore an expensive new dress that Doug had never seen before, purchased, no doubt, with his money. "Darling," she exclaimed, embracing him with practiced enthusiasm. "I missed you so much." Doug returned her embrace mechanically, noting the unfamiliar perfume, another new purchase. "Welcome home. You look well rested." "The accommodations were better than I expected," she replied with a practiced sigh. "Though watching Dad struggle was so difficult." "I'm sure it was," Doug said neutrally, helping her with her coat. "How is Roland doing now?" "Much better," Vanessa said, following him to the car. "The procedure was a complete success. He's staying in Switzerland a bit longer for follow-up treatments, but the doctors are very optimistic." Doug nodded, listening to her elaborate on the fictional surgery and recovery as he drove them to the restaurant. Each lie she told was another nail in the coffin of their marriage, but he maintained his composure, occasionally asking questions that allowed her to dig herself deeper. At Le Bernardin, they were escorted to a corner table with a view of the water. Doug had requested this specific table, private enough for what would transpire, but public enough to prevent Vanessa from making a scene. "This is perfect," she said, beaming as a waiter poured champagne. "You remembered." "I remember everything," Doug replied, raising his glass. "To honesty and trust, the foundations of any lasting marriage." If Vanessa detected any irony in his toast, she didn't show it. She clinked her glass against his and took a sip, launching into a story about a nurse at the Swiss clinic who had been particularly helpful. Doug allowed her to talk through the appetizers and main course, watching with detached fascination as she elaborated on her fictional ordeal, adding details and emotional flourishes. She was good. He had to give her that. Had he not seen the photos, he might have believed every word. As dessert was served, Doug finally spoke the words he'd been rehearsing for weeks. "So, Vanessa, how's your dad's health?" "Really?" Something in his tone caused her to pause mid-bite, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I told you, he's doing much better." "That's interesting," Doug said calmly, "because I spoke to Patricia at his office last week. Apparently, Roland hasn't missed a single squash game with Judge Winters in months." Vanessa froze, her complexion paling beneath her tan. Before she could formulate a response, Doug reached into his jacket and removed his phone, placing it on the table between them. "I've been meaning to ask you about these as well." He turned the phone toward her, displaying the first of the Facebook photos, Vanessa on the yacht in Monaco, champagne in hand. "This doesn't look like a hospital in Switzerland." That's..." Vanessa's voice faltered as Doug swiped through more photos. Vanessa shopping, Vanessa at the casino, Vanessa kissing Jackson Montgomery. "You know what I find most interesting?" Doug continued, his voice deceptively conversational. "You didn't even bother to untag yourself. It's almost like you want to get caught." "Doug, I can explain," Vanessa began, her composure cracking. "Can you explain this?" He swiped to a bank statement showing the transfer of his retirement funds to an account in the Cayman Islands. "Or this." Another swipe revealed travel records showing Vanessa's flight to Monaco, not Switzerland. "Or perhaps you'd like to explain who Jackson Montgomery is and how long you've been planning this together." Vanessa's face had turned ashen. She reached for her water glass with trembling hands. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Doug replied, his voice hardening. "You stole $300,000 from me, my retirement fund, under the pretense that your father was dying. You used that money to fund a luxury vacation with your lover. You've been systematically betraying me for at least a year. He leaned forward. Did I miss anything? Vanessa's shock was giving way to calculation. Doug could see it in her eyes as she scrambled for a way out. Doug, please. Jackson's just a friend. Those photos are misleading. I did go to Monaco, but only for a few days to clear my head. Dad really was sick. Stop lying. Doug cut her off. I have everything, Vanessa. The money transfers, the hotel reservations, the text messages between you and Jackson going back months. It's over. He placed the wrapped package on the table. Happy anniversary. With nervous fingers, Vanessa unwrapped the album and began to page through it. Each turn revealed more damning evidence. Photos, bank statements, travel records, all meticulously organized and annotated. How did you get all this? She whispered. I had help, Doug answered. The same way you'll need help finding a new place to live. I've changed the locks on the house. You can't do that, Vanessa hissed, her shock transforming into anger. That's my home too. Actually, I can. The house is in my name. You insisted on that arrangement for tax purposes, remember? Doug took a final sip of his champagne. Your personal belongings have been packed and will be delivered to whatever address you provide my attorney. Attorney? Vanessa's eyes widened. Doug, let's not be hasty. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out. The divorce papers have already been filed. Doug stood, placing several bills on the table to cover the check. I suggest you contact your own attorney. You'll need one. Vanessa grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. You can't just walk away from 15 years. Doug looked down at her hand, then back at her face. I'm not walking away from anything. You did that the moment you decided to steal from me. He gently removed her hand. Goodbye, Vanessa. He was halfway to the door when he heard her desperate voice behind him. You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Doug turned, meeting her gaze one last time. Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with now. That's the problem. As he walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, Doug felt a strange mixture of emotions. Grief for what he'd lost, anger having been so thoroughly deceived, but also a sense of clarity. The confrontation that had consumed his thoughts for weeks was over, but he knew Vanessa well enough to understand that this was only the beginning. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, Doug. You made a serious mistake. Jackson Montgomery had entered the game. Doug smiled grimly as he pocketed his phone. Let them come. He was just getting started. Chapter 5. The Empire Strikes Back. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, Doug was discovering just how vindictive Vanessa could be when cornered. The opening salvo came in the form of a temporary restraining order, based on allegations that Doug had threatened her during their anniversary dinner. It was completely fabricated, but it served its purpose, preventing him from accessing their home while she remained in residence, despite his efforts to evict her. It's a delay tactic, Tori Klein explained during an emergency meeting in her downtown office. She can't win this way, but she can buy time while she figures out her next move. Time to do what? Doug asked, pacing the conference room. Strip the house bare? She's already drained the joint accounts. Fortunately, you moved most of your liquid assets before she could get to them, Tori reminded him. As for the house, we filed for an emergency hearing. Judge Calloway's court is backlogged, but we should get a date within 10 days. Doug's business was suffering as well. Somehow, and he had a pretty good idea how. Rumors had begun circulating among potential clients that Brenner Construction was in financial trouble. 2 major contracts had been put on hold pending further review, and a developer he'd worked with for years had suddenly become unreachable. They're trying to strangle you financially, Luis observed over beers at the hotel bar where Doug was temporarily staying. Classic squeeze play. Jackson's got connections in the business community. He's using them to turn the screws. Doug took a long pull from his beer. They're playing hardball. That's fine. So can I. The next day brought a new complication. Doug arrived at his office to find Hank waiting with a grim expression. We lost the Westlake bid, Hank announced without preamble. Word is Sullivan Enterprises underbid us by 15%. Doug stared in disbelief. That's impossible. They'd be taking a loss at that price point. Exactly, Hank confirmed. Roland's not trying to win the contract. He's trying to hurt you. This is personal. So Vanessa had enlisted her father's help. The same man who supposedly needed life-saving surgery was now using his corporate resources to attack Doug's livelihood. The betrayal had expanded to include Roland Sullivan himself, not just a bystander, but an active participant in his daughter's schemes. That afternoon, Doug received a text from Abby. "You need to see this." Channel 7 News. Now, he turned on the small television in his office just in time to catch a special investigative report featuring a tearful Vanessa being interviewed about her traumatic marriage to a controlling and financially abusive husband. "He monitored all my spending," Vanessa claimed, dabbing at carefully manufactured tears. "When I finally stood up to him, he became threatening. I feared for my safety." The reporter, a woman Doug recognized as one of Vanessa's former sorority sisters, nodded sympathetically. "And these allegations that you misappropriated funds?" "Completely false," Vanessa declared. "The money was used exactly as intended for my father's medical care. My husband is simply trying to punish me for wanting to end an unhealthy relationship." Doug watched in stunned silence as his reputation was systematically dismantled on local television. By painting herself as a victim, Vanessa was attempting to control the narrative, and it might work. Seattle's social circles would undoubtedly side with the Sullivan heiress over the nouveau riche contractor who had supposedly mistreated her. His phone began ringing immediately after the broadcast. Concerned friends, business associates, even his bank manager wanting to discuss recent developments. Doug ignored them all, instead calling Wesley Collins. "I need everything you can get on Jackson Montgomery," he instructed the PI. "Not just his history with women. I want financial records, business dealings, associations, everything. And I want dirt on Roland Sullivan, too." "That'll cost you," Wes warned. "Sullivan's powerful. He's got people paid to keep his secrets." "I don't care what it costs," Doug replied. "Find me leverage." The next few days brought more setbacks. A small fire broke out at one of Doug's construction sites. Minor damage, but enough to trigger an insurance investigation that would delay the project for weeks. Then 3 key employees resigned simultaneously, citing personal reasons that Doug suspected involved financial incentives from Sullivan Enterprises. The pressure intensified when Doug discovered his business line of credit had been suddenly frozen pending a routine review. Without access to those funds, he would struggle to meet payroll for the remaining crew within 2 weeks. "They're trying to break you," Luis observed during their nightly strategy session. "Make you desperate enough to settle." Doug nodded grimly. "Roland's using his banking connections. Jackson's probably feeding him information about which pressure points to target." "What's your play?" Luis asked. Doug stared at the documents spread across the hotel room desk. Bank statements, credit reports, project timelines. "They think I'll crumble if they attack my business. They don't understand what I've overcome to build it." His expression hardened. "I need to change the battlefield." The following morning, Doug implemented the first phase of his counter-strategy. He called an emergency meeting of his remaining staff. "I won't lie to you," he told the assembled team. "We're under attack. Not from market forces, not from legitimate competition, but from people who want to see us fail for personal reasons." He paused, making eye contact with each person. "I understand if any of you want to leave. No hard feelings. But for those who stay, I promise you this. When we come out the other side, and we will, your loyalty will be remembered." To Doug's surprise and gratification, no one left. Instead, Hank stepped forward. "We know who you are, boss. The rumors don't change that." With his core team secured, Doug executed the next part of his plan. He contacted each of his existing clients personally, explaining the situation with transparency but not desperation. He offered to continue their projects at cost until the temporary financial restructuring was complete. Most importantly, he reached out to Malcolm Zhang, a rising developer who had been repeatedly snubbed by Roland Sullivan in the past. Malcolm had a reputation for backing underdogs and harboring a particular dislike for old money power plays. "Let me get this straight," Malcolm said during their lunch meeting. "Sullivan is trying to destroy your business because his daughter stole your money and you called her on it?" "That's the short version," Doug confirmed. Malcolm shook his head in disgust. Roland's pulled this kind of stunt before. Try to muscle me out of the Greenwood project last year. He leaned forward. How would you like a contract that not only keeps your business afloat, but also sticks it to Roland in the process? By the end of the week, Brenner Construction had signed an exclusive agreement to develop Malcolm's newest venture, a mixed-use project directly across from a Sullivan Enterprises property, designed specifically to outshine Roland's development. It wasn't enough to solve all of Doug's problems, but it bought him time, and it sent a clear message. He wouldn't be broken easily. The personal attacks continued. Vanessa filed amended divorce papers claiming that Doug had hidden assets and demanding not only half of everything, but additional compensatory damages for alleged emotional distress. Then a woman Doug had briefly dated before meeting Vanessa suddenly came forward with claims of harassment, conveniently represented by the same attorney handling Vanessa's case. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, Tory Klein assured him. These tactics reek of desperation. Maybe, Doug conceded, but they're effective. The restraining order is still in place. The house situation is unresolved, and my reputation takes another hit with each new allegation. Then it's time to change tactics, Tory declared. They want a public battle? Let's give them one, but on our terms. The counteroffensive began with a carefully worded press release documenting the timeline of Vanessa's deception, backed by bank records and travel documentation. It wasn't as sensational as Vanessa's tearful interview, but it raised enough questions to make the business community take notice. Next came affidavits from long-term employees and clients attesting to Doug's character and business ethics. Several of Vanessa's former friends, alienated by her narcissism over the years, came forward with stories that contradicted her victim narrative. But the real breakthrough came when Wesley Collins delivered his comprehensive report on Jackson Montgomery and Roland Sullivan. The thick folder contained information that made Doug's eyes widen as he read. Is this verified? He asked the PI. Wes nodded solemnly. Multiple sources, all documented. The Sullivan fortune isn't as clean as Roland pretends. That night, Doug met with Luis, Tory, and Wes to formulate the next phase of his strategy. They've been playing offense, Doug told the assembled group. Now it's our turn. Chapter 6, The Drawing Board. We need to be absolutely clear about your objectives, Tory Klein said, leaning forward across the conference table. Are you looking to win the divorce, salvage your reputation, save your business, or extract revenge? Because those might require different strategies. The question hung in the air as Doug considered his priorities. They were gathered in a private room at the Rye Bar, Doug, Tory, Wesley Collins, Luis, and Abby. 5 people united by a common purpose, helping Doug reclaim what had been taken from him. All of the above, Doug finally answered. But if I had to choose, I'd say justice. Vanessa and Jackson stole my money and tried to destroy me when I caught them. Roland joined in to protect his daughter and punish me for exposing the scheme. I want them to face consequences for that. Real consequences. That's not how the system usually works, Tory cautioned. The wealthy and connected rarely face the same justice as everyone else. Then we create our own system, Doug replied, his voice steady. What do we have? Wesley Collins opened his laptop. Let's start with Jackson Montgomery. Harvard dropout, comes from money, but the family cut him off 10 years ago after multiple scandals. He's been living off wealthy women ever since. 3 ex-wives, all claiming financial fraud after the fact, but settling privately to avoid embarrassment. The PI clicked to another screen. Here's where it gets interesting. For the past 2 years, he's been running a so-called investment advisory firm that's essentially a shell company. He convinces clients, mostly older, wealthy individuals, to invest in non-existent development projects. The returns he shows them are actually funds from new investors. A Ponzi scheme, Abby remarked. Exactly, Wes confirmed. He's been flying under the regulatory radar because the individual investments are relatively small and the victims don't complain. But altogether, we're talking about approximately $2 million in fraudulent investments. And Vanessa knew about this? Doug asked. Better than that, Wes said, displaying a series of emails. She was actively helping him recruit new marks from her social circle. That's how they met. She brought a friend's mother to him as a potential investor. Doug felt a wave of revulsion. He'd known Vanessa was materialistic and self-centered, but he hadn't realized the depth of her moral bankruptcy. "What about Roland?" he asked. Wes's expression turned grim. Roland Sullivan's public image as a respectable businessman is largely a facade. His early real estate deals involved systematic bribery of city officials to gain favorable zoning changes. More recently, he's been involved in money laundering for certain clients who need to clean cash from less than legal enterprises. "Can you prove any of this?" Torai asked sharply. "Some of it," Wes acknowledged. "I have documentation on 3 specific bribery instances and banking records showing suspicious transaction patterns consistent with money laundering. Not enough for a guaranteed conviction, but certainly enough to trigger investigations." "And would an investigation find more?" Doug pressed. "Almost certainly," Wes confirmed. "Sullivan's been operating this way for decades. Once authorities start digging, they'll find plenty." Luis, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "So we have leverage against all 3 of them. How do we use it?" "Carefully," Tori cautioned. "These are serious allegations involving federal crimes. We can't just threaten to expose them without potentially being accused of extortion." "I don't want to threaten them," Doug clarified. "I want to dismantle them, systematically and legally. I want them to understand what it feels like to lose everything they've built." Abby studied her brother with concern. "Doug, I understand your anger, but this level of revenge, are you sure it's worth it? These people could still hurt you." "They already tried to destroy me," Doug reminded her. "My business, my reputation, my home, they targeted everything. I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice and protection. If I don't stop them completely, they'll keep coming after me." The group fell silent, considering the weight of what Doug was proposing. Finally, Tori spoke. "If we do this, we need a comprehensive strategy, one that compartmentalizes each target and addresses each vulnerability separately. We need contingency plans, fail-safes, and plausible deniability." Doug nodded. "That's why I brought all of you together. Each of you has skills and knowledge I need." Over the next several hours, they outlined a multi-phase plan that targeted Vanessa, Jackson, and Roland simultaneously, but independently. They identified each target's vulnerabilities, established clear objectives, and assigned specific roles. Luis would handle technology, ensuring secure communications and accessing digital information when necessary. Wes would continue gathering evidence and conducting surveillance. Torai would manage legal maneuvers and ensure their actions remained within the boundaries of the law. Abby, with her extensive social connections, would work on reshaping the public narrative. At the center of it all was Doug, whose personal knowledge of each target would guide their approach. "Phase 1 begins tomorrow," Doug announced as they concluded their planning session. "Roland first, then Jackson, then Vanessa." "Why that order?" Luis questioned. "Because Roland has the most resources but the most to lose," Doug explained. "Once we neutralize him, Jackson becomes more vulnerable. And Vanessa, she'll be the last to fall," Tori finished for him. "Exactly," Doug confirmed. "She needs to understand what it feels like to lose everything and have no one to turn to." As the meeting broke up, Abby pulled her brother aside. "Doug, I've never seen this side of you before." "The coldness. It's always been there," Doug replied quietly. "I built my business by outthinking competitors and anticipating problems before they arose. I'm just applying those same skills to a different challenge." "Just don't lose yourself in this," Abby warned. "Revenge can consume you if you let it." Doug squeezed her hand reassuringly. "This isn't about revenge, Abby. It's about justice. And when it's done, I'll walk away and rebuild my life." Whether he actually believed that was another matter entirely. The next morning, Doug stood in front of the mirror in his hotel room, straightening his tie with steady hands. Today, the counterattack would begin. Roland Sullivan had spent decades building his empire and reputation. He had no idea that both were about to crumble. Doug's phone chimed with a text from Wesley Collins. "All systems go. Target 1 follows his usual Thursday routine." "Understood," Doug replied. "Proceed as planned." He tucked his phone away and took one last look at his reflection. The man staring back at him wasn't the trusting husband who had liquidated his retirement fund to help his father-in-law. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone unforgiving. Time to return the favor, Doug murmured to himself as he headed for the door. Operation Downfall had begun. Chapter 7, Opening Gambit. The first phase of Doug's plan required precision, timing, and the element of surprise. Roland Sullivan's weekly routine was predictable. Thursday morning golf at the country club, followed by lunch with his regular foursome of influential business associates. It was during these lunches that deals were made, confidences shared, and the real business of Seattle's elite was conducted. Doug had no intention of confronting Roland directly. Instead, he had arranged for an inconspicuous envelope to be delivered to each member of Roland's foursome, containing copies of selected documents from Wesley's investigation along with a simple note. Your associate Roland Sullivan is under federal investigation for money laundering and bribery. Continuing to do business with him may implicate you. This is a courtesy warning. The beauty of the move was its deniability. The information was true, even if no formal investigation had yet been launched. And the warning could be interpreted as a friendly heads-up rather than a threat. By 3 p.m., Doug received word from a contact at the club that Roland's lunch had ended abruptly, with his associates making hasty departures and obvious excuses. By 4 p.m., Roland was seen making urgent phone calls from his car in the parking lot. The second part of the Roland operation involved Abby's connections. As the development director for a major arts organization, she had relationships with many of Seattle's wealthy philanthropists, including several who had invested in Sullivan Enterprises projects. I'm not suggesting anything, she told one influential board member over coffee. I'm just concerned that some of our supporters might be exposed if these allegations about Roland Sullivan turn out to be true. The foundation's reputation is my priority. By the end of the day, 3 major investors had called Roland demanding emergency meetings. 2 others had contacted their attorneys. The final component involved an anonymous tip to a financial crimes investigator at the Seattle office of the FBI, delivered through layers of cutouts arranged by Wesley Collins. The tip didn't mention Doug or Vanessa. It focused entirely on Roland's business practices, supported by enough documentation to warrant preliminary interest. That evening, Doug met Luis at their designated secure location, a rented office space registered to a shell company Tory had established. Phase 1 is proceeding exactly as planned, Luis reported, showing Doug the monitoring software he'd set up. Sullivan's making panic calls to everyone in his network. His stock dropped 8% just on rumors. What about Jackson? Doug asked. He and Vanessa met for lunch at the Four Seasons. Based on their body language, they're worried but not panicking yet. They don't understand the full scope of what's happening. Good, Doug nodded. Tomorrow we move to Phase 2. Phase 2 targeted Jackson Montgomery's financial house of cards. Using the evidence Wesley had gathered, Doug authorized Tory to contact 3 of Jackson's investment victims, elderly individuals who had lost significant sums but had been too embarrassed to come forward. Tory approached them not as Doug's attorney, but as a specialist in financial fraud recovery. I believe I can help you recoup some of your losses, she told each one. But you'll need to file formal complaints with the Securities Division and possibly speak to investigators. Simultaneously, Luis implemented the digital component of their strategy. Using specialized software and insider knowledge gained from an IT specialist at Jackson's bank, he created a digital trail highlighting suspicious transactions in Jackson's accounts. Nothing illegal, just a breadcrumb trail that would be impossible for financial regulators to ignore once they started looking. The coup de grace came from an unexpected source, Moira Davidson, Vanessa's so-called best friend. After a private meeting with Abby, during which certain social and professional opportunities were discreetly mentioned, Moira agreed to provide copies of text messages in which Jackson and Vanessa had explicitly discussed their scheme to defraud Doug. Why would she betray her friend like this? Doug asked when Abby delivered the evidence. Because Vanessa isn't really her friend, Abby explained. According to Moira, Vanessa has been sleeping with Moira's husband for over a year. This is her own revenge play. The revelation gave Doug a moment's pause, another layer of betrayal he hadn't anticipated. Had there been any honesty in his marriage at all? By the end of the week, both Roland and Jackson were feeling the pressure. Roland's business associates were distancing themselves, investors were demanding audits, and federal investigators had requested preliminary meetings. Jackson's investment scheme was showing the first signs of collapse as nervous clients began requesting withdrawals he couldn't cover. "They're still not connecting it to you," Wes reported during their next strategy session. Sullivan thinks it's a competitor trying to leverage a takeover. Montgomery believes one of his earlier victims has finally figured out the scheme. "And Vanessa?" Doug asked. "Increasingly desperate," Wes confirmed. "She's been trying to access more of your joint assets, but keeps hitting walls. The prenup you had is holding stronger than she expected. That's because we modified it on our 10th anniversary," Doug explained. "She insisted on changes that actually strengthened my position. She was so confident I'd never discover her betrayal that she didn't think it through." The prenuptial agreement had been Vanessa's idea originally. Her father's influence, protecting the Sullivan family money. Over the years, it had evolved through several amendments, most recently when Vanessa had wanted access to more liquid capital for her interior design business. The irony that her own legal maneuvering was now working against her wasn't lost on Doug. "What's our next move?" Luis asked. Doug consulted the timeline they'd established. "We accelerate. Vanessa still has the restraining order in place, which limits my ability to reclaim the house. Time to have that dismissed." 2 days later, Doug stood before Judge Eleanor Harwood, a no-nonsense jurist known for her disdain for legal gamesmanship. Tori had specifically requested her court for the emergency hearing. "Your Honor," Tori argued, "the temporary restraining order was obtained under false pretenses. We have affidavits from restaurant staff and other diners confirming that no threats were made during the dinner in question. Furthermore, Ms. Brenner's own text messages to friends both before and after the dinner contradict her sworn statement." The judge reviewed the evidence, her expression growing increasingly stern. "Ms. Brenner," she addressed Vanessa, who was present with her attorney, "are you aware of the penalties for perjury in my courtroom?" Vanessa's attorney intervened. "Your Honor, my client was under extreme emotional distress at the time of filing. Perhaps some of the details were—" "Save it," Judge Harwood interrupted. "The restraining order is dissolved, effective immediately." She fixed Vanessa with a piercing stare. "And I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible perjury charges." As they left the courtroom, Doug caught Vanessa's eye. For the first time since their confrontation, he saw genuine fear in her expression. That evening, Doug returned to his home, accompanied by Wes and a police officer to prevent any confrontation. As expected, Vanessa had removed numerous items, artwork, electronics, even furniture, but the structure itself remained intact. Doug walked through the empty rooms, feeling strangely detached. This house that he had designed and built with such care now felt like a museum of betrayal. Each space held memories that had been poisoned by Vanessa's deception. "You don't have to stay here tonight," Wes suggested, noting Doug's expression. "We can secure it, and you can come back tomorrow." Doug shook his head. "No, this is my home. I won't be driven out of it again." After Wes departed, Doug showered in the master bathroom, noticing that Vanessa had taken all the expensive toiletries and settled into the bedroom with his laptop. The king-size bed felt enormous without her presence, but also somehow cleaner, as if a contaminant had been removed. He was reviewing progress reports from Luis when his phone rang, an unlisted number. "Mr. Brenner," a smooth, confident voice began. "This is Jackson Montgomery. I think it's time we talked man to man." Doug's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. "I have nothing to say to you, Montgomery." "I think you do," Jackson countered. "This vendetta you're pursuing, it's going to end badly for everyone. I'm offering a chance to resolve things amicably." "Amicably?" Doug repeated with disbelief. "You helped steal $300,000 from me, then tried to destroy my business when I caught you. There's nothing amicable to discuss." "That money can be returned," Jackson said quickly. "With interest. Certain investments I've made are about to mature substantially." Doug almost laughed. The Ponzi scheme was clearly collapsing if Jackson was desperate enough to offer repayment. Too late for that. Listen to me. Jackson's voice hardened. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Roland Sullivan doesn't lose, ever. He survived challenges from people far more powerful than you. And yet he's currently explaining suspicious financial transactions to federal investigators, Doug observed. Funny how that works. A brief silence. That's your doing. I have no idea what you're talking about, Doug replied, maintaining plausible deniability. But I'm not surprised Roland has attracted regulatory attention. Men like him usually do, eventually. What do you want? Jackson demanded, his composed facade cracking. Name your price to end this. Doug closed his laptop slowly. I don't want anything from you, or Roland, or Vanessa. I just want justice. And it seems the universe is providing that without my intervention. You're making a mistake, Jackson warned. This doesn't end with a few uncomfortable questions from regulators. This ends with consequences you can't imagine. Threatening me isn't wise, Doug replied calmly. It just confirms I'm on the right track. He ended the call and immediately texted Wes. Montgomery just contacted me directly, sounding desperate. Increased surveillance. The next morning brought news that validated Doug's assessment. Jackson's investment firm had failed to open for business, and clients arriving to check on their accounts found locked doors and a sign indicating temporary closure for audit purposes. Phase 2 was proceeding faster than anticipated. Time to prepare for the final stage, the complete dismantling of Vanessa's world. Chapter 8, Desperate Measures. The sudden collapse of Jackson Montgomery's investment scheme sent shockwaves through Seattle's affluent circles. The Seattle Times ran a front-page expose detailing how dozens of wealthy retirees had been defrauded of millions in a sophisticated Ponzi operation. Jackson himself had disappeared, his downtown condo emptied overnight, his luxury cars gone from their parking spaces. For Doug, this development was both satisfying and concerning. Jackson fleeing suggested he was more desperate than anticipated, and desperate men were unpredictable. We need to find him, Doug instructed Wesley Collins during their morning briefing at the secure office. If he's running, he might have Vanessa with him, and he's likely taken whatever liquid assets he could gather. Wes nodded grimly. Already on it. I've got contacts monitoring airports, train stations, and major highways. If they're still in the Seattle area, we'll find them. Doug turned to Luis. What's the status on Roland? Fighting for his corporate life, Luis reported, showing Doug the latest financial reports. Sullivan Enterprises stock has dropped 22% in the past week. 3 board members have resigned, citing personal reasons. And the FBI executed a search warrant at his downtown office yesterday. He hasn't connected these events to me. No indication so far, Luis confirmed. He's blaming business rivals, overzealous regulators, even bad luck. His ego won't let him believe his daughter's discarded husband could orchestrate something like this. Doug allowed himself a thin smile. Roland's arrogance had always been his blind spot, the belief that a self-made contractor couldn't possibly outmaneuver Sullivan. The mood was briefly celebratory. Their plan was working better than expected, until Abby arrived with troubling news. Vanessa's gone public, she announced, displaying her tablet with a live stream from a local news channel. She's playing the victim card again. The screen showed Vanessa, looking appropriately distressed in a modest outfit that belied her usual taste for luxury, speaking tearfully to a sympathetic reporter. I'm terrified, she was saying. First my husband's vindictive behavior. Now my financial advisor has apparently defrauded me and many others. I've lost everything. The reporter nodded sympathetically. And you believe these events are connected? I can't prove it, Vanessa replied carefully, but the timing is suspicious. Ever since I tried to leave my controlling marriage, these systematic attacks have occurred. My father's business is suffering. My investments have disappeared. Even my reputation has been damaged by vicious rumors. Doug watched with grudging admiration. Vanessa was skilled at manipulation, crafting a narrative that positioned her as the victim of circumstances rather than their architect. She's getting ahead of the story, Tori observed, establishing herself as another one of Montgomery's victims rather than his accomplice. Smart move, but ultimately futile, Doug replied. We have the text messages from Moira proving Vanessa was actively involved in the scheme. Which we should release now, Louise suggested, before her victim narrative takes hold. Doug considered this, but shook his head. Not yet. If we expose her too quickly, she'll just adapt her story. We need to let her establish this false narrative fully, get invested in it. Then we destroy it completely. The strategy session was interrupted by an urgent call from Wesley's assistant. We've located Montgomery, the PI reported when he returned. He's at the Olympic Hotel under an alias. He's made arrangements for a private plane to leave Boeing Field for Mexico tomorrow morning. Is Vanessa with him? Doug asked. No. Based on the booking, he's traveling alone. Doug processed this information. He's abandoning her, saving himself while she provides cover with her public sympathy play. Exactly, Wes confirmed. But he won't get far. I've already alerted the SEC and FBI about his travel plans. Hold off on that, Doug instructed, surprising everyone. I want to speak with him first. Doug, that's not wise, Tori cautioned. Direct contact could complicate our strategy. I don't intend to threaten or negotiate, Doug clarified. I just want to see his face when he realizes it's over. After that, the authorities can have him. Despite the team's concerns, Doug was adamant. That evening, accompanied by Wesley Collins, who insisted on being present as security, Doug entered the Olympic Hotel and took the elevator to the penthouse floor, where Jackson was hiding under the name James Carter. He's got at least one bodyguard, Wes warned as they approached the suite. Former military, based on his movements. Be careful, Doug nodded, feeling strangely calm. He knocked firmly on the door. After a long pause, the door opened to reveal a burly man with a close-cropped haircut and vigilant eyes. Can I help you? I'm here to see Jackson, Doug stated plainly. Tell him Douglas Brenner is waiting. The bodyguard's expression remained impassive, but he stepped back briefly to relay the message. A moment later, Jackson himself appeared at the door, looking considerably less polished than usual. His designer suit had been replaced by casual clothes, his normally perfect hair disheveled. Brenner, he acknowledged with a tight smile. I'm surprised you found me. But then, you've been full of surprises lately, haven't you? We need to talk, Doug replied. Alone. Jackson considered this, then nodded to his bodyguard. It's fine, Frank. Wait in the bedroom. Once they were alone in the suite's living room, with Wesley positioned discreetly near the door, Jackson gestured toward the minibar. Drink? Might be my last chance to enjoy the hotel's fine selection. I'm not here for hospitality, Doug declined. I'm here to offer you a choice. Jackson poured himself a generous scotch. A choice? How magnanimous of you. What exactly are my options? Option 1. You confess everything. Your investment fraud, your relationship with Vanessa, the plan to steal my money. You return whatever funds you still have access to and cooperate with authorities. I'll put in a word suggesting leniency for your cooperation. Jackson took a slow sip of his drink. And option 2. I contact the FBI and SEC right now, Doug said, holding up his phone. They're very interested in your travel plans for tomorrow. Mexican authorities have also been alerted to watch for you at private airfields. Your assets will be frozen, and you'll spend the next decade in federal prison. Jackson's composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine fear before he masked it with a sardonic smile. You've thought of everything, haven't you? The humble contractor outplaying the con man at his own game. I built a business from nothing, Doug replied evenly. You built a house of cards by stealing from others. This outcome was inevitable. Jackson finished his scotch in a single swallow. Even if I wanted to cooperate, which I'm not saying I do, there's not much left to return. The market turned against some investments. Others were less genuine than presented to clients. Whatever you have left, Doug insisted, and a complete accounting of where my $300,000 went. Your money. Jackson laughed bitterly. That's long gone. Split between Vanessa's shopping sprees and keeping Roland's more demanding creditors at bay. Doug's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes hardened. Roland was involved? Not directly, Jackson clarified, pouring another drink. But he has debts you don't know about, gambling, mainly. The prestigious Sullivan Enterprises has been operating on fumes for years. Vanessa's been quietly funneling money to keep her father afloat. This was new information, and it explained why Roland had been so quick to join Vanessa's attack on Doug. He was protecting not just his daughter, but his own financial lifeline. So the real Ponzi scheme was Sullivan Enterprises, Doug observed, using new investments to cover losses from bad bets. Something like that, Jackson confirmed, a flicker of respect crossing his face. You're sharper than Vanessa gave you credit for. Where is she now? Doug asked. No idea. Jackson replied with practiced indifference. We decided to pursue separate strategies after your little courtroom victory. You abandoned her, Doug translated, after you helped her steal my money and destroy my reputation. Jackson shrugged. Business decision. Vanessa's Sullivan connection became more liability than asset once Roland started drawing regulatory attention. Doug studied the man before him. Handsome, educated, clearly intelligent, yet fundamentally hollow. There was no remorse in his explanation, no recognition of the lives he'd damaged. You have until morning to decide, Doug said finally. Cooperate or face the consequences. I'll expect your answer by 9 a.m. As he turned to leave, Jackson called after him. She never loved you, you know. From the beginning, you were just a convenient mark with good income potential. The devoted husband who would never question her. Doug paused at the door. I know that now. The question is, does she love you? Or are you just another mark in her game? The flicker of uncertainty that crossed Jackson's face was answer enough. Outside the hotel, Wes expressed concern. You told him our entire strategy. What if he runs tonight? He won't get far, Doug assured him. While you were watching The Bodyguard, Luis was tracking the location of Jackson's phone and laptop. If he moves, we'll know immediately. The next morning at precisely 9 a.m., Doug received a text message from an unknown number, option 1, where and when. By noon, Jackson Montgomery was sitting in a conference room at the SEC Seattle office, providing a detailed confession about his investment fraud. He named accomplices, detailed methodologies, and surrendered access to offshore accounts containing approximately $800,000 in remaining funds, a fraction of what he had stolen, but better than nothing. Conspicuously absent from his confession was any mention of Vanessa's involvement or the theft of Doug's retirement money. When pressed on these points, Jackson claimed the funds had been a legitimate loan between Vanessa and Doug, and that he had no knowledge of the terms. He's protecting her, Torrey observed as they reviewed the transcripts, either out of some misguided loyalty or because he thinks she can still help him. Or because he's afraid of her, Doug suggested. Vanessa can be vindictive when crossed. Speaking of vindictive, Luis interjected. Have you seen what Roland is doing? He's called an emergency board meeting of Sullivan Enterprises. Word is he's planning to liquidate assets before the feds can freeze them. The news was concerning, but not unexpected. Roland would fight to the bitter end, using every resource and connection at his disposal. Let him try, Doug replied. The investigators already have enough to block any major transactions. As they were discussing next steps, Doug's phone rang. Wesley Collins calling from his surveillance position near Vanessa's temporary apartment. She's on the move, the PI reported. Packed several suitcases into her car. Looks like she's planning to leave town. Follow her, Doug instructed. But don't intervene. Let's see where she's going. The answer came 90 minutes later when Wes called again. You're not going to believe this, he said. She's at your house, using a key to get in. Doug felt a surge of anger. Despite the restraining order being dissolved, the divorce proceedings were still active, with clear instructions that neither party should remove additional items from the house without court approval. I'm on my way, Doug told Wes. Call the police for a civil standby. She's violating the court order. By the time Doug arrived at his home, 2 police officers were already on scene, and Vanessa was being escorted from the house in handcuffs, shouting protests about her rights and belongings. This is my house, too, she yelled when she saw Doug. You can't keep me out of my own home. Doug approached calmly, maintaining a safe distance. The court order is very clear, Vanessa. No removal of property until assets are formally divided. What were you doing in there? Getting my personal items, she snapped. Things that have sentimental value. Unlike you, I actually have emotions. One of the officers interrupted. Ma'am, we found jewelry, financial documents, and what appears to be a hidden safe in the process of being emptied. That goes beyond personal items. Vanessa's expression shifted from indignation to calculation. "Doug, please," she said, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. "Can we talk privately? This has all gone too far." "I agree," Doug replied evenly. "It has gone too far, but we'll let the courts handle it from here." As the police prepared to transport Vanessa to the station for booking on contempt charges, she made one last desperate attempt. "They're after me," she said urgently. "Jackson's associates. They think I have access to money that's gone. I need protection." The sudden shift to a fear narrative was classic Vanessa, always adapting, always finding a new angle to manipulate the situation. But this time, Doug was unmoved. "If you're concerned for your safety, tell the police," he suggested. "I'm sure they can recommend appropriate measures." As Vanessa was led away, still protesting, Doug entered his home to survey what she had attempted to take. In the master bedroom, a hidden wall safe, installed years ago at Vanessa's insistence for her jewelry, stood open and partially emptied. Inside, Doug found what she had been seeking, a USB drive labeled insurance. Later that evening, after securing the house, Doug met with his team to examine the contents of the drive. Luis connected it to a secure laptop, and they watched as folders appeared containing hundreds of documents. "Holy shit," Luis whispered as he opened files at random. "These are internal Sullivan Enterprises documents. Financial records, communications with banks, evidence of systematic tax fraud." She was keeping insurance against her father, Tori realized. Protecting herself in case he ever turned against her. And evidence against Jackson, too, Abby added, pointing to another folder. Financial transfers, client lists, even recordings of him discussing the fraud. Doug sat back, contemplating the implications. She never trusted either of them. All this time, she was playing her own game. The USB drive was a treasure trove of evidence that could sink both Roland and Jackson permanently. And Vanessa had preserved it, not out of any moral consideration, but as leverage for her own protection. "What do we do with this?" Wes asked. "Turn it over to the authorities?" Doug considered the question carefully. The contents of the drive would ensure Roland and Jackson faced severe consequences for their actions. But it also potentially implicated Vanessa in ways that went beyond their original plan. "Make copies," he decided finally. "We'll use it strategically." The team exchanged glances, sensing that Doug's revenge strategy was evolving into something more complex, and perhaps more severe than they had initially agreed to. "Doug," Abby began cautiously, "I know they hurt you badly, but remember what we discussed. Don't lose yourself in this." Doug met his sister's concerned gaze. "I won't," he promised, "but justice needs to be complete. They all played a role in this conspiracy. They all need to face consequences." As the team dispersed for the night, Doug remained alone in the secure office, reviewing the documents Vanessa had so carefully preserved. Each file revealed new layers of deception and fraud, painting a picture of three individuals who had spent years manipulating and exploiting others for personal gain. His phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "This isn't over. You have no idea what's coming." Roland Sullivan had finally realized who was behind his troubles. The game was entering its final, most dangerous phase. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. 2 days after discovering Vanessa's insurance drive, Doug received an unexpected invitation delivered by courier. A formal request for his presence at Roland Sullivan's office to discuss matters of mutual concern. The timing was suspicious. Roland must have learned about Vanessa's arrest and realized the USB drive had fallen into Doug's hands. "It's a trap," Luis warned during an emergency strategy session. "He's desperate and cornered. There's no telling what he might do." "I agree it's risky," Tori added, "but it also represents an opportunity. If Roland is willing to negotiate, we might achieve our objectives without further escalation." Doug considered both perspectives. "What's Roland's current situation?" "Deteriorating rapidly," Wes reported. "Sullivan Enterprises stock has been temporarily suspended from trading pending investigation. 3 of his properties have been seized as potential proceeds of money laundering. His social standing is in free fall," he He was asked to resign from 2 charitable boards yesterday. And Vanessa? Released on bail this morning, Wes continued. She's staying at a friend's apartment under surveillance. Based on her phone activity, she's been trying to contact both Roland and Jackson without success. Doug nodded thoughtfully. And Jackson, cooperating with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. He's been transferred to federal custody. They're worried about potential threats from investors he defrauded. The pieces were aligning. Roland, Vanessa, and Jackson were increasingly isolated, their alliance fracturing under pressure. Now was the time to deliver the final blow, but carefully, strategically. I'll meet with Roland, Doug decided, but not alone and not at his office. Neutral ground, with precautions. The meeting was arranged for the following morning at a private conference room in the Four Seasons Hotel. Public enough to ensure safety, but private enough for candid conversation. Doug arrived early, accompanied by Tori Klein and Wesley Collins, who positioned himself discreetly in the hotel lobby. Roland Sullivan arrived precisely on time, flanked by his personal attorney, Graham Matthews, a silver-haired litigator with a reputation for representing Seattle's elite. Roland looked significantly diminished from when Doug had last seen him at a family gathering months earlier. His designer suit hung loosely on his frame, and deep lines etched his once imposing face. Douglas. Roland greeted him with forced cordiality. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Let's skip the pleasantries, Doug replied. What do you want? Roland's mask of civility slipped slightly. Direct as always. Very well. He placed a slim folder on the table. This is a settlement offer. $300,000. Your original money, plus an additional $200,000 for inconvenience. In exchange, you will cease all actions against me, my company, and my daughter. Doug didn't touch the folder. What actions are you referring to exactly? Roland's jaw tightened. Don't play naive. It doesn't suit you. The anonymous tips to federal investigators. The strategic leaks to my investors. The coordinated attacks on my business relationships. You've been systematically dismantling my life's work. That's quite an accusation, Doug replied calmly. Do you have any evidence that I've done these things? I don't need evidence, Roland snapped. The pattern is obvious. Everything began collapsing immediately after you discovered Vanessa's indiscretion. Interesting choice of words, Doug observed. Indiscretion. Is that how you characterize the theft of $300,000 and subsequent attempt to destroy my reputation and business? Roland waved dismissively. Matters between you and Vanessa are separate from this discussion. I'm offering a generous settlement to end this vendetta. Doug finally reached for the folder, opening it briefly before closing it again. This offer is insufficient. Insufficient. Roland's composure cracked further. I'm offering you $500,000. Money isn't the issue, Doug replied. Justice is. Your daughter stole from me. Then you joined her attempt to destroy me when I discovered the theft. You used your company resources and connections to attack my business, reputation, and livelihood. Business is business, Roland countered. You became a threat to my family. No, Doug corrected. I became a threat to your fraud. The Sullivan Empire isn't what you've pretended it is, Roland. It's built on bribery, tax evasion, and money laundering. Roland's face paled. You're making dangerous accusations. Doug reached into his briefcase and removed a USB drive identical to the one found in Vanessa's safe. Not accusations. Facts. Documented in meticulous detail by your own daughter. Recognition flashed in Roland's eyes. Vanessa would never. She did. Doug interrupted. She maintained an extensive record of your illegal activities as insurance. Perhaps she knew that eventually you'd sacrifice her to save yourself. Roland turned to his attorney, who appeared equally stunned. Graham, I need a moment with my son-in-law. Alone. The attorney began to protest, but Roland silenced him with a sharp gesture. Tori similarly objected to leaving Doug alone, but he assured her it was acceptable. Once the attorneys had stepped outside, Roland's demeanor changed completely. What do you really want? He demanded, all pretense of civility abandoned. Everything, Doug answered simply. Sullivan Enterprises returns to legitimate business practices under new leadership. You retire, quietly and permanently, with enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. Vanessa receives nothing from the divorce except personal belongings I designate. And you both acknowledge, in writing, the full extent of what you did. Roland stared in disbelief. You're insane. I'd be admitting to federal crimes. The agreement would be private, Doug clarified, held in escrow by an independent attorney, released only if either of you ever attempts to retaliate against me in any way. And if I refuse? Doug gestured to the USB drive. Then copies of these documents go to the FBI, SEC, IRS, and Seattle Times simultaneously. You'll spend your remaining years fighting criminal charges, civil suits, and public disgrace. Roland's face flushed with anger. You ungrateful bastard. I welcomed you into my family. Gave you connections, opportunities. You did none of those things, Doug interrupted. You tolerated me because Vanessa insisted. You undermined me at every opportunity. You never believed I was good enough for your daughter, despite building a successful business from nothing while you were inflating yours with fraud. The two men stared at each other across the table. Decades of tension crystallized in a single moment. Finally, Roland slumped slightly. You've won, he conceded, his voice suddenly tired. I'll sign whatever you want. But Vanessa deserves something from this marriage. Vanessa deserves consequences, Doug corrected. Just like you. Just like Jackson. Actions have repercussions, Roland. That's the lesson here. Within 24 hours, documents were prepared detailing the terms of surrender. Roland Sullivan would announce his retirement due to health concerns, transferring control of Sullivan Enterprises to a professional management team approved by the board. He would retain a modest pension and one residence, with all other assets placed in a trust to cover potential liabilities discovered during the company's restructuring. Vanessa would receive no financial settlement from the divorce. The prenuptial agreement would be enforced in its entirety, with additional penalties for documented fraud. She would retain only her personal clothing, jewelry, except pieces purchased with Doug's stolen retirement funds, and family heirlooms with no significant monetary value. Most importantly, both Roland and Vanessa signed detailed confessions acknowledging their actions against Doug, documents that would remain sealed unless they ever attempted to retaliate or challenge the agreement. The final piece involved Jackson Montgomery, who had initially refused to implicate Vanessa in his fraudulent schemes. With evidence from a USB drive, Doug's team presented him with a stark choice. Include Vanessa in his cooperation agreement with prosecutors or face additional charges based on the new evidence. Jackson chose self-preservation, as Doug had known he would. 3 weeks later, Doug sat in Tory Klein's office reviewing the final divorce decree. The judge had approved all terms without modification, noting the extraordinary circumstances and compelling evidence of fraud. It's done, Tory confirmed, closing the folder. Legally, financially, and practically, they've been completely neutralized. Doug nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, lingering anger at the betrayal, but also a curious emptiness. The crusade that had consumed him for months was complete. What now? Any word on their current situations? He asked Wes, who had joined them for this final meeting. The PI consulted his notes. Roland has moved to the small property we allowed him in Tucson. Based on his expenditures, he's living relatively modestly. Sullivan Enterprises is undergoing complete restructuring under new management. They've already settled with several defrauded investors. And Vanessa? Working as a sales associate at a boutique in Portland, Wes reported, using her maiden name. The manager is an old sorority sister who took pity on her. She's living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda. Doug absorbed this information without visible reaction. The fall from grace had been dramatic for both Sullivans, from penthouse luxury to ordinary, even struggling, circumstances. Jackson, sentenced to 8 years for securities fraud, Wes confirmed. With good behavior, he'll serve about 5. The cooperation agreement saved him from a much longer term. Luis, who had been quiet until now, looked at Doug with concern. Was it worth it? All of this? Doug considered the question thoughtfully. The past months had changed him profoundly. The trusting, generous man who had liquidated his retirement to help his father-in-law was gone, replaced by someone more cautious, more strategic, perhaps harder in some ways. It was necessary, he finally answered. Not just for justice or revenge, but for protection. They would have kept coming after me if I hadn't stopped them completely. And now, Abby asked gently, "What happens now, Doug?" He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "Now I rebuild. Brenner Construction has weathered the storm. We've got the Jean project underway and 3 new contracts since the truth about Sullivan Enterprises became public. And personally," Abby pressed, "this house that holds so many painful memories. I'm selling it," Doug revealed. "Closing next week. I've purchased land overlooking Puget Sound. Going to design something new, something that's solely mine." The tension that had gripped the group throughout their campaign visibly eased. Doug's revenge had been thorough and devastating, but it hadn't consumed him. He had maintained his moral boundaries, even while delivering justice to those who had wronged him. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to go their separate ways, Doug thanked each of them individually for their loyalty and support. "I couldn't have done this without you," he told them sincerely. "You believed in me when the world was turning against me. I won't forget that." Later that evening, Doug stood on the empty deck of his soon-to-be former home, watching the sunset over Lake Washington. His phone buzzed with a text message, an unprogrammed number he didn't recognize. "I understand now what you did and why. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not that it matters. V." He stared at the message for a long moment, considering whether to respond. Finally, he typed a simple reply: "It matters. Learn from it." Then he deleted the conversation, put away his phone, and turned his attention back to the sunset. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new beginnings. The past was settled. Justice had been served. It was time to look forward. Douglas Brenner had lost his retirement fund, his marriage, and his trust in others. But he had reclaimed something more valuable: his dignity, his self-respect, and his future. The revenge was complete.